Hello and welcome to another episode of our Brothers Creed podcast. We're talking about motivation, experiences, and we explore the world around us. We are the Thomas Brothers, and I am Jared.
And I'm Ethan. And today we're talking about different warrior training methods and groups of warriors that have, let's say, particularly rigid training paths or requirements in order to become that type of warrior. I'm sure you can think of some of the most elite soldiers or warrior groups throughout history. Jared and I are going to break some of those down. What does it take to be that type of warrior? How did they get there? Maybe what was some of the training or rituals that they had to go through to achieve that warrior name? So it's going to be a great episode. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information.
And that, my friends, is called integrity. That's called courage. Now that's the stuff leaders should be made of.
Either you're somebody or you're nobody.
You're not the devil. You're practice.
So I think that when I think about just warriors into different societies, I think that most of these warrior type soldiers who have been trained, since a young age, that is almost entirely going to be from history. I can't really think of very many modern day examples of someone growing up in an environment like that. I mean, maybe someone who's like some kids who have been captured and radicalized in some kind of terrorist training camp with all of our U.S. equipment.
Yeah.
But, I can't really think of any society today that really does this, or that like people's sole purpose in their life is to be a warrior. Most of the time it's just people join
I don't know.
up.
I think maybe kind of like, I don't know, one of the modern day equivalencies are certain countries that have like a mandatory service requirement that you have to it's like a 2 years mandatory armed services requirement. But that's more of just like, I wouldn't consider that like training from youth or from birth, right?
Definitely
That's more
not.
of just like, fulfilling your obligation or
your civic duty. That's more of like the government just like flexing their muscles and saying like, if you cross us, we will send you to war and kill you. So, I mean, not that I disagree with like any type of doing service for your country. I think it's a great thing. But when you make everybody do it, it maybe changes the tone.
Well,
a little bit from the
I don't think mandatory conscription is that bad of an idea. I think a lot of people in the U.S. could do to be humbled a little bit.
I think you're right. I was thinking about like China or like North Korea, where like they got you under their thumb, and but doesn't like Switzerland have a mandatory everybody?
Yeah, I think like Israel does. I had
Israel does.
When I was in South America, I was good friends with the guy that was from Bolivia, and Bolivia, I think they had that. I don't know if Colombia might as well. So, yeah.
Well, it's either to the cartels or to the government. So
you serve one or serve the other, or you serve them both.
But maybe my view of like those who join is a little bit naive. I think there's multiple reasons why people join. One is people who need money, or they have nowhere else to go. That's where you get a lot of the arguments that like, oh, the U.S. is sending, African Americans to go fight the white man's war, or they're sending their poor people to go fight their rich wars. That's where that argument kind of comes from. I think the other class of people that join are like patriots. You get a lot of these folks joining up, especially after like 9/11, stuff like that. Maybe not so much anymore because it's so fuzzy, what is actually defending our country versus what is just doing the government's bidding for the president or for somebody else. And then you get these other folks who are just psychopaths and they want to kill in a legal way, so they join the army.
Not as many as those, but not as many of those, but I'm sure that exists.
Yeah, I think I heard that in a movie once, but so I thought that was a funny one to throw in there. But anyway, so we're talking about folks who have been steeped in their culture's warrior culture since very early on in life. One of the ones I'm going to talk about first is the samurai. Now, we actually did a full episode on samurai in the Code of the Bushido, which is the 8 virtues of Bushido, which is the virtues that a samurai lives by and espouses. So during the feudal periods of Japan, which lasted a very long time, during the last feudal period, the Endo period, there's quite a bit of information about how these samurais worked and how people were trained into becoming a samurai. So the only way to become a samurai at that point was to be born into a samurai family. And this is during the last Endo period. At other periods, it wasn't exactly like that. But you kind of had to be born into this nobility, or you could marry into it, or be adopted into that family of a samurai. So when a young boy reached the age of 7, he was gifted a short sword called I'm going to butcher this, kizashi. Starts with a W. I'm assuming the W is silent. Kizashi, as I think is what it's called. And he's gifted that by his father. It's like a miniature. It's between like a tanto knife and a samurai sword. It's just kind of like a miniature sword. And the boy, is kind of given to him as kind of his first step towards becoming a samurai. He's taken to the local school to be presented to the daimyo, who is the sword master. And the young boy would be called a chigo. That's kind of the young kids up until the age of about 13. So what they're expected to do is they're expected to live by a very strict set of rules. I mean, these are just little kids. I mean, one of my kids just turned 7, and so he can't be doing crazy stuff. He can't be just sword fighting out in the yard with himself. In fact, he took the axe out yesterday of the woodshed and started chopping one of our trees down. I'm like, why did you do that, buddy? And he's like, oh, well, it's not dead until it's falled over, right? I'm like, dude, come on, man. So, yeah, there would need to be a very strict set of rules. They do lots of schoolwork, mostly just memorization type work, and they learn from the older kids. They do lots of chores, a strict curfew at nights and on the weekends. And like I said, they were educated by the older boys that had previously gone through that program. They were also practicing martial arts and a variety of different things. Some were doing bow and arrows. Some were doing, learning to ride horseback. So different things. At age 13 to 14, the boy would transition to adulthood. Like kind of official ceremony. So there's actually 3 ceremonies. A genpuku ceremony, which is when they're given their adult clothing, and they actually choose a name, and they shave the front of their heads. And so an audience with a daimyo, and a formal presentation from Chingo to Nisei. I think that's right. N-I-S-E. N-I-S-E, yeah. Maybe it's nice. I'll say Nisei, because that sounds better than just nice. Because these are badass warriors.
Sounds more Japanese.
Yeah. The new Nisei spent time teaching junior students and doing jobs for the daimyo. So that was kind of their thing. And then they also continued their martial arts training. And the samurai did not practice like any martial arts that we know like today, like karate or judo or whatever. The samurais actually practiced kind of an older form of martial arts, as well as a lot of, when you think about it, it was more like there's actually bow and arrow training and like spears and horseback and like all these different things. And there's different kinds of samurai and the different things that they did. So it can vary. But that's actually basically the training that they would go through. Some of these 13-year-old kids were put into battle. So it's like there's really no end to the training. At some point, from 13 on, they were thrust into battle. In some cases, even as young as 13. So they would just develop and grow from there in their trainings and their learnings from their daimyo. But that was how they got into it as kids. And also, I just wanted to honorable mention here for the 8 virtues of Bushido, which is what they would live by. The first is justice, courage, and then compassion, respect, integrity, honor, loyalty, and self-control. I love this, and because it's like the creed of the samurai. And I think it's so cool that they have these 8 virtues laid out that each one of these boys from the age of 7 espouses, and they try to show these in every action that they take, both in their personal and political lives and also as warriors. So, pretty cool.
That's pretty crazy, like the age, and that's actually going to be a common theme, I think, as we go through these, are just the age that some of these kids start at in their training. Man, it's so young. It's like 7 years old or 8 years old.
Yeah.
It's just like, I guess if you want to get at them young, then you got to start the training early.
But you have to, like, in our society, we train people up to be knowledgeable about a wide variety of subjects, They need to know about all kinds of things. But if you're training someone up to be a warrior, there's some stuff that you could probably cut corners on, They probably don't need to know Pythagorean's theorem. They probably don't need to know the macroeconomics, supply and demand. They need to know how to slice. There's a lot of stuff you can just cut out when you only have one purpose in life. And I think in the modern era, we sometimes veer from that, except for a lot of times we do see this kind of training when you have a father who is in an industry and he trains his son or daughter up in that same industry. And that's where you see a lot of this generational wealth. And a lot of times it's because these kids have been trained since they were very little how to do this stuff, and they continue into the father's business, and that's where that wealth, they already step into it knowing a whole lot that a lot of other people didn't grow up doing. Think about like the Rothschilds, think about Rockefellers or even Trump. Like he kind of got a $1 million loan from his dad, and that kind of thing. And he had already been kind of in the business, been around it. You think about lots of dentists and chiropractors and small family doctor's offices where you get father, son, or plumbing, even like plumbing businesses, this kind of stuff where there's like a continuation.
Yeah, I was watching a video somewhere. It was talking about like the continuation of something like that. He's like, if your dad is, in this day and age, everyone is encouraged. You can do anything you want. You can be anyone you want to be. You can do anything you want to do, and whatever else. But it was like there's nothing more powerful than just generational progression, and literally it's like a snowball of like, my dad did this and he started this, and then I got into it, and then when he passed it down to me, and I got my sons into it, and then we grew it and grew it and grew it, and just snowballs into something that could be massive, generational.
Yeah. Totally.
But that's interesting. Yeah, the samurai, man, those are some bad dudes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would say probably some of those 13-year-olds or whatever you were saying they're going to war. Those guys are probably, I mean, they got more training and combat training than
some farmer
or I do.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so it's like, I mean, to be completely honest, I wouldn't want to meet one of those kids on the battlefield.
No. No. Well, maybe a 13-year-old I would, but like a 16, 17-year-old? I mean, it's like right now, when I go to jiu-jitsu, there's like a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old. This one kid, he's 17, he's like a junior in high school, and he works at Harris Teeter, bagging groceries, and he is a blue belt, and he's good, man. Like, he taps me all the time, and I'm like, dang, dude, he's just a kid, you know? So,
Yeah.
hey, if you got the right training, it doesn't matter. I mean, we're relatively the same size. I mean, he's lighter than I am, but still, he is a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, that's crazy. So the one that I had, so Jared did Samurai. The next one that I did was I went into a little bit deeper into the Spartan warriors. Obviously the Spartan culture, and I think we've kind of dug into this a little bit in previous episodes about kind of more of the culture and some of the stories that we've told. But I wanted to drill down specifically into kind of the early days of Spartan training, and then how that kind of develops into them joining the I don't know, let's call it the military at that time. So Spartans were their training began at the age of 7, when the boys were taken from their families and placed in a state-run education system called the agoge. And this agoge was overseen by really strict instructors who taught the boys everything from reading, writing, arithmetic, to physical training, to weapons handling, all the way to military tactics. And so during their time from 7 years old, during their time at the agoge, there's a couple different stages of the agoge, and we'll get to those. But how they started off and how they lived their life while they were there was they lived in barrack type systems. So it was kind of like a military school, I guess you could say. But they were given minimal clothing, minimal food and shelter, and they did this with the intent of toughening them up and teaching them to endure hardship. So I was just like, man, from the get-go, it's just rough.
Yeah.
They're not getting enough to eat. They're cold. They're not comfortable in their living situations, and they're constantly encouraged to fight. So it says they were encouraged to fight amongst themselves to develop a sense of competitiveness and aggression. So infighting was completely encouraged.
That's interesting. Well, that's that's philosophy is absolutely opposite of the philosophy today, But
yeah,
I guess,
it's everybody be nice and everybody's comfortable and is everybody doing okay?
Well, did you have kids like killing themselves back then? I wonder if that was a thing. I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you had people running, or you had.
Trying to
But the
escape
thing
or
is, these kids are like 7 years old. I mean,
yeah, it's crazy.
yeah. So as they passed through the agoge, they were given more demanding and more physically rigorous training, such as long-distance running, wrestling, a mastery of martial arts. They were also trained in using weapons such as spears, shields, swords, kind of all of the Spartan weaponry that you think of when you think of the 300. That was just a glimpse of the Spartan army. So in this agoge, they began when they were 7 years old, and it lasted until they were 20 years old, at which they became full-fledged Spartan citizens and members of the Spartan army. So if they did not graduate from the agoge, then they were not considered full-fledged Spartan citizens and not members of the army. And so many times they were shamed Let's see. It says boys who failed to meet the standards of the Agoge were often shamed and ostracized by their peers, and in some cases they were expelled from Sparta altogether. So that's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? Yeah, how tough it would have been for these kids. But at the same point, I would, and maybe it's part of their culture, but I would think as a parent that would kind of be tough too to, have your child torn
Shunned.
away from you at
Yeah.
7 years old and thrown into this brutal lifestyle.
Is this all children or is this just some children?
I think it's just all male children.
Well, what about like the politicians and stuff like that weren't Spartan warriors?
Oh, I think they still had to. I think they still had to train. I mean, it was my impression.
What about
that
the farmers or like, interesting.
Yeah, and maybe they still graduated from this, but they didn't join the military service. Maybe they had other duties. Actually, you know what? I think Sparta had tons of slaves. And I think they had their slaves do a lot of farming and different things like that for them. Obviously, you have politicians. I do know that some Spartan warriors and generals became politicians as well, but there had to have been maybe some deeper kind of ranks and stuff. Because, I mean, some people were just not as good as fighting as other people.
Yeah.
So the first stage of the Agoge, they were in there. They were young. They were just learning. This was called the Paides. It was focused on basic education and physical training. It was to kind of teach them reading, writing, math, and then just get them strong, as well as all sports and physical activities. So this was just to help kind of develop their coordination and their minds and everything else. Build that sense of competitiveness, and they were encouraged to fight, like I had said before, because they were trying to develop a sense of aggression in them at all times. They were constantly encouraged to have these like mock battles, or kind of encouraged different scenarios that would cause these boys to be in competition with each other, just to these contests that would kind of simulate battle to a certain extent. The second stage of the Agoge was called the Paidomenos, and that involved more advanced physical training and then started the actual military instruction. The boys then, and this probably has to do with their ages. I don't have the exact age bands, but obviously as they progress through, would be as they get older. In this second stage, they were trained in the spear, the sword, and the shield, and to fight in the phalanx formation, which is what we know the Spartan warriors fought with. It was like this special sword and shield
combination
formation that they fought in.
Yeah,
that was brutal. And then also in this stage, they were taught military tactics and strategy, and as well the importance of discipline and loyalty to the state. The third stage of the Agoge was the Irene, and this was the most grueling and demanding of all. These were obviously the older candidates, or the older students. This involved much more intense,
if you will.
yeah, cadets, I guess, yeah. Much more intense physical training and endurance tests and other challenges designed to specifically test the boys' strength, courage, and loyalty. And I don't know if this particular, I tried to look up some of the challenges that it talked about, but I couldn't really specifically find any. But you think of like the beginning of 300, how the boy had to go out with like just a spear, and he had to kill a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect they were kind of similar to maybe survival or feats of strength or kind of coming of man type things that they had to do. So once they got past that and that final stage, they got to the point to where they would graduate and become full Spartan warriors, full-fledged members of society, and they would be highly respected by the rest of the community. So in, I guess, 5 or 6 bullet points of the things that they taught in this Spartan school, the Agoge, was physical training, weapons training, military tactics, wrestling, endurance, discipline, and agnostic training, which involves engaging in like competitions such as races, wrestling, boxing, fostering a competitive spirit to develop aggression. So imagine doing all of that for, let's see, from the age 7 to the age of 20. So for 13 years, that was your entire life, all day, every day. I mean, you'd be a bad dude when you came out of that, man.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Well, I wouldn't want to go up against someone like that that's been, training for all these years, just ready to unleash all this pent-up anger and rage and trauma from their childhood.
Seriously. Well, and I liked what you said before I ended there, is just, you'd be hard. I bet you these guys were hard, man. I bet you they were hard and physically, emotionally. I mean, I bet you they were, I don't know. Yeah, how could, I mean, in today's day and age, they put kitty litter in the bathrooms because kids are too scared to use the toilets or think they're cats or
they
something
identify
like
as
that.
cats, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, dude, they need like crying booths in school. And it's just like
our college kids even melt down at someone sharing an opposite opinion or being in their safe space.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that
we should take these guys as kids.
we should, I think there's a balance, right? I don't know if this Spartan way is the way that needs to be done. But you got to think, too, that in this time period, their entire life was war. That's all they knew. That's all everyone knew. I mean, the world was just constantly in war. It was just constantly groups of people taking people over. The Spartans, the Athenians, the whatever the different groups are that are
Persians eventually, right?
The Persians, the Greeks, they're all just killing each other, trying to get land and everything else. So literally, if you want to survive, you need to either have a ton of people. I know the Persian army just had like
conquered
billions of people,
or you need absolute monsters.
Yeah, seriously.
So make them a monster from just the start,
Yeah.
Interesting. That's cool. Well, the next warrior that I had was the Apache warrior. So the Apache were an Native American Indian tribe that had some pretty cool tactics and techniques and ways of training up their younglings. So Apache warriors could be both men and women. They could both become warriors, and their training began at a young age. Many of their toys were mock weapons like bows and arrows and spears, so that they could kind of get used to playing with weapons of war. One of the main things about the Apache is they wanted to reach peak physical condition. That was one of their trainings. And so in some of the trainings that they would do with these young boys or girls, it could be both, they would have them run up hillsides with a mouthful of water to learn the correct breathing through your nose. I know Ethan and I recently read that book, what was it called, Jaws?
Jaws,
about your oral facial health and how breathing through your nose is so important. And so
they had it right.
Yeah, they absolutely did. Helps your jaw grow better and lots of different stuff. So it also helped with endurance. is doing that. The boys were hardened through wrestling games, mock battles, taught by their relatives geography, like attributes of the land and war, and then the sanctity of their surroundings. As they were coming of age, the coming of age trial for a warrior was to run for 2 days straight with no food and no sleep. So that's pretty brutal. It's kind of like that last like Spartan trial when they get to be like a teenager, right? If they were low on water while doing something strenuous, such as climbing a mountain, they would put a pebble in their mouth and breathe only through their nose. So it's kind of just not letting that water escape out of your mouth. They were also trained to be able to lie completely still and disappear into their surroundings. They would toughen their bodies by diving into frozen rivers. So they that Wim Hof method going on. They got that ninjutsu about disappearing in their surroundings. Once they got introduced to horses by the Spanish, they really took to horsemanship in America, and they had already been masters of the bow and arrow. But once they were introduced to their firearms and rifles, they became proficient very quickly. So, kind of a cool training. I thought it's pretty cool about the one where they, running for 2 days with no sleep and no water across like a territory. What's that show, Against the Crooked Sky, where the kid has to run like? You remember? It was like a.
I can't. I know you're talking about, but I can't remember the.
Yeah, it was a movie, and there was like a kid, and he had to like. It was with an Indian tribe, and he had to beat the sun on like the next day sunrise as it came up, and like it drew a line across this rock, and he had to like run and race against the time and get across the finish line to save his family or something like that. Anyway, I just remember the end. That was a old school classic. Pulled that one out of the archive.
The childhood memories.
Yeah, exactly. But one famous Apache that you may have heard of is a guy named Geronimo. Have you ever heard that?
Yep.
So Geronimo was an Apache medicine man who, after having his family killed, turned to fighting in the Apache Wars against Mexico. So the Apache fought the Mexican army. Well, at that time it was kind of more the Spaniards. Similar to how the Comanches did it. The Comanches were also another warrior society. We talked about the Comanches, though, in a different episode. I think
invading and raiding into Mexico.
Oh, yeah. So, Geronimo, in his despair, he basically went to the mountaintop, and he heard a voice on the wind that told him, "You will never die in battle, nor will you die by gun. I will guide your arrows." And so he believed that to be a charge to go into battle, and he just had no regard for his life because he believed that was from like a divine voice that he heard on the wind. So during a battle that he was fighting with the Mexicans, Geronimo did not fire arrows from cover as many other Apache did. Instead, he ran zigzag at the Mexican soldiers so as not to be hit by their bullets. He would then kill them with a knife and take their rifles back to the Apache warriors, as he didn't know exactly how to use the rifle at that point. So the Mexican soldiers began to shout, "Geronimo!" to warn each other of his charges. The origins of the word still are still kind of unknown, but I think that's where it might come from, is those Mexican soldiers yelling, "Geronimo!" And when he was coming at him, doing the zigzag, and the Apache, or they're sometimes also referred to as the Chiricahua Apache, began to chant the name in enthusiasm and intimidation. So they would chant Geronimo. So the guy was fearless, and he had just would kind of run that zigzag pattern, run up right over to where they were, kill them and take their guns, almost like that like trench warfare almost. Just run up and kill them and grab them, run them back. And so it's pretty cool. It reminds me of a scene from Band of Brothers where there's like this one sergeant and he's trying to give orders to the guys across the way, and they're like in a firefight, and he literally just like runs straight over to him, like right in front of the Germans, and they were so stunned they just look at him, they're like, "What the heck?" And he runs over to the other like little bunker area where the other guys are at and tells them what to do, and he just ran like literally like 5 feet away from the Germans, and they were like so stunned they didn't even do anything. So that's the Apache warriors, and I didn't know that Geronimo was an Apache, but he was. You know, he wasn't like a warrior from the beginning, but he definitely became a warrior at the end of his life.
Yeah, that's cool. That's pretty crazy how, you know, some of those like traditions and stuff develop, like, you know, running up the hill with water in your mouth and these different things that, I mean, to a certain extent, they did those things because they probably worked to a certain extent, or I mean, they made you tougher. They didn't kill you, or if they weren't, you know, overly harmful or risky, then, you know, I there's probably a reason.
Yeah.
And so, you know, whether training them to breathe through their nose, or for, you know, oxygen training under oxygen deprivation, or
just being quiet too. You know, if you're trying to sneak up on someone in the woods and you're mouth breathing, they're gonna hear you, man.
Yeah, that's true too.
So
just hopefully you didn't have to do it with a sinus infection.
yeah. Well, there's some definite wisdom in these old cultures too. I think sometimes we as modern people think we're so sophisticated or whatever, but you know, there's a lot of wisdom that has been lost to the ages. There's probably more wisdom that's been lost to the ages than we know right now. So,
well, I think it was under kind of the weird therapies episode. We talked about I talked a little bit about wives' tales, and just kind of these old, you know, weird sayings that people have that, oh, when you're sick, do this or don't do that or whatever else. And for some reason, a lot of times they work. Well, it's kind of trial and error, and they just, that worked one time, and then you kept doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it, and it seems to work every time. So, yeah, I agree with you. Sometimes, you know, our science is just proving sometimes what these people have been doing for hundreds of years.
So it's like a modern day wives' tale for your experience recently, Ethan. If your child is acting sick, do not take them to the Golden Corral.
Yeah, well, he wasn't acting sick until afterwards, but I mean, that's probably a sign too. And if he says he has a stomach ache, put a bucket next to the bed and tell him if you have to throw up in the bucket, not on the floor next to the bucket.
Poor guy.
Yeah. So the last one that I had was this one. There's not a ton of information around the specific training that they would do, but I've always been super interested in something that's called the Pretorian Guard. So the Praetorians, or the Pretorian Guard, was a special elite unit of soldiers that served as personal bodyguards to the Roman emperor. And so they were first established in 27 BCE by Augustus, who was the first Roman emperor. And he named the Pretorian Guard after what was called the Praetorium, which the Praetorium is the tent of the Roman general that served as his kind of headquarters during battle. So the Roman general, his headquarters, his tent was called the Praetorium. And so that's where the Pretorian Guard came from. So
nice.
At its peak, the Pretorian Guard contained about 9,000 soldiers who were very specifically and meticulously selected for their loyalty, discipline, and combat skills. They were highly trained in martial arts and weapons handling, and were equipped with the best weapons and armor available at the time. So it kind of made me think of the what was in the Game of Thrones, the guys that the group of knights that guarded the main area. um,
The knights that guarded the,
yeah, like the king. What was it? The
you're talking about the Knights Guard. Or no,
yeah,
the King's Guard.
the King's Guard. That's what it was.
Or like the guys in the red suits that were in Star Wars that protected the Emperor, Emperor
Yes.
Snoke.
Yes. Yeah. So they were kind of like that, right? They were just like I guess the best of the best soldiers. And so I think it's kind of interesting too, because it says they were trained in martial arts, and it said the Spartans were trained in martial arts as well. And then it said the Japanese were trained in martial arts as well. Now, I don't know what martial arts meant back, hundreds or even thousands of years ago. I mean, the Japanese I kind of understand maybe, but what kind of martial arts were Romans trained in?
Well, maybe
Or
just
were-
wrestling and,
I mean, I guess boxing
hand-to-hand
or
combat kind of a thing,
I mean, I mean, I'm sure that fighting was more prevalent then than it is now. So, I mean, I guess you had people in the Colosseums and the gladiators and everything else. Like, you didn't have people that were fighting for sport. You had people that were fighting for their life.
Yeah.
So maybe it was even more serious. But the Pretorian was, so in addition to their role as bodyguards for the Roman emperor, they served as the private army for the emperor himself, as well as they were responsible for maintaining order in the city of Rome. So they were kind of like that knights, that King's Guard, right? They maintained order in Rome, as well as they were the private army for the emperor. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
They is kind of interesting too. A little bit more about them is they actually held a lot of significant political power and influence in the Roman Empire, and there's actually they got involved, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, depending on who you were, in some of the selection and deposition of some of the emperors. There was one famous story that I was reading about of basically the leader of the Pretorian Guard. He was loyal to, there was two guys that were potentially supposed to become the next emperor, and the one guy that became emperor was not the guy that the leader of the Pretorian Guard thought should become emperor. And so they basically formed up a coup and made
Killed
it
him.
so that they
Yeah.
ended up killing this guy and then gave it to the other guy. So they kind of just chose who they wanted to be emperor.
Interesting.
So they were notorious for their involvement in numerous conspiracies and assassinations throughout Roman history. But they lasted for about 300 years, which is kind of cool.
It's quite the
So there was,
legacy. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of history there. Until Constantine actually disbanded them and replaced them with what they called the new Imperial Guard.
That's what they're called in maybe Star Wars.
Yeah. So despite a lot of the kind of the controversial reputation that the Pretorian Guard had, it still remains as one of the most elite fighting forces in all of history, at least Roman history for sure. And I was actually thinking about this too, and it was really interesting. There's this YouTube channel that you can go to, and I can't remember the name of it, but basically it shows like you can it's a computer simulation, and it's computer generated, and you can have two different types of enemies battle.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all of these metrics that go into what kind of weapons they have, they get certain values, and what kind of armor they have, they get certain values, and what kind of training they get a certain level of value. And so obviously there's anything from I don't know, maybe a medieval archer, right? To all the way up to, you could have a medieval knight, or you could have samurais, you could have Spartan warriors, you could have, all these, all the way up to Chuck Norris, who wins all fights that he fights. And so, but this guy on YouTube, he does like, 100 or maybe 100,000 medieval knights versus 100,000 samurai.
Oh, yeah.
And then he'll have them fight, and then it's kind of, you can see him fighting and in the different tactics and stuff, and it's just kind of interesting.
Huh.
But it just made me think, who would win in a battle between a lot of these, different groups of people. So,
Well, the broadsword would have absolutely trashed the samurai, the katana. But those two groups never really fought each other.
No, they wouldn't. But the samurai had amazing like battlefield tactics, and their swiftness and their bow and arrows, and
yeah, I mean, it depends on like how you're doing. If you're doing like a head-to-head battle, like in the open field, I'd take an armored up knight over a samurai, just because the whole point of a broadsword is to pierce armor. You're not going to get that with a katana.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. But the Praetorians, once they were selected, they went through like a whole secondary round of training.
Yeah.
Where they underwent rigorous training, martial arts training again, weapons handling, and hand-to-hand combat. So how can we apply this to our own personal creeds? Number one, it's just freaking awesome to know this stuff. And history is cool. But also, I think that we can learn from kind of the elite in history. You think today you have maybe the elite fighting forces are the Navy SEALs, or the Russian Spetsnaz, or
the Green Berets,
the Green Berets, or all these different people. But how can we still apply, some of the
you forgot one. You forgot one special forces group. The guys from India on camelbacks with rocket launchers with
with mortars on the back of camels.
Mortars on the back of camels. Sorry, go ahead. You're making a point.
No, I was just saying, how can we apply some of these things? And I think one of the biggest things for me that I got as I was reading through this was discipline. Right? It was these people, they just repetitive training and discipline. Mm-hmm. They had a goal in mind. And some of them were probably forced into this, right? At an age of 7, they probably didn't have much of a choice to go into the Spartan training school. Mm-hmm. But they were forced into, or made the decision to go down this path, and they were disciplined, or they had to be disciplined to survive.
Yeah.
And so how can we be disciplined? That's my word of the year is discipline. And some days I'm really good at it. Some days I'm not as really good at it. But hopefully by the end of the year, I will have come a lot closer to mastering discipline. But that was kind of the word that I took away from this. Is these are some bad dudes, and I think they got that way in many different ways. Bad dudes is in they were strong and fast and quick and good at fighting, but I'm pretty sure too they were probably super smart.
Yeah.
And I think I can do that same thing through discipline.
Yeah. I think that we can apply this to our creed because these civilizations brought these people up for a single purpose, and that was to kill. But what should we bring our kids up to? What if we brought our kids up to a single purpose, and that purpose was to make the world better, or to lift those up around them? I think that when you have a specific goal in mind for the type of man or woman, in some cases, that you want to create, not even create, I think that when you raise children, they're all very different.
Develop.
You can develop them towards similar goals, and then there you can use each of their unique skills and their unique personalities to go towards that goal to bless the lives of others and the whole world. And so I think that as fathers and parents, it's important for us to train our kids up, and I think through discipline. I think giving our kids measured doses of struggles, and each one of these, there's an aspect of making them struggle, pushing them, and sometimes at the edge of their limits. I think that it is beneficial, and you can do that with any goal that you have, whether that's to make them a fighting machine, because that's what's most needed in the world at the time, or if that's to make them a gatherer of men, or a peacemaker, or someone who has enough guts to go out there and boldly declare to the world what it is that needs to happen to turn things around, or to get on the right track, or someone who can speak truth. So I think that those are things that we can aspire to.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, excellent. I think this has been a great episode. Lots of cool stuff. Love reading the history. Just can imagine a lot of these different things going on, and be pretty cool. We should. I think pretty cool to get like a Pretorian patch, and put it on. Or like an elite special forces, they get a Pretorian patch or something like that for for doing a special mission or something.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, we should do like a Brothers Creed Pretorian T-shirt or something.
Oh yeah, that'd be sweet. We could do the Warrior series.
Probably Pretorian is probably trademarked or something like that, though.
I don't think by the who? The Romans?
I'm gonna
it's
get
past
sued by Caesar.
the trademark has run its course. So.
Yeah, he gets sued by Little Caesars.
All right, fellas. Well, let's. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening, and let's build that creed together.
All right, let's do it.